The night I realized my relationship was built on lies didn't begin with a fight. It began with silence. Not the peaceful kind that fills a home after a long day, but the heavy kind that makes every little sound feel louder than it should. I remember lying awake beside Ryan, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing while my mind refused to rest. For 4 years, I believed I knew the man sleeping next to me. I believed we were building a future together. Looking back now, I realize I was in love with the version of him he wanted me to see. My name is Emma, and I'm 31 years old. I work as an architect in downtown Chicago. I've always believed that trust is the foundation of every strong relationship. My parents raised me to be honest, loyal, and patient, and I carried those values into every part of my life. When I met Ryan, it felt like all those years of waiting had finally paid off. We met at a charity fundraiser I almost didn't attend. A coworker convinced me to go after weeks of nonstop work. I wasn't expecting anything more than a polite evening filled with small talk and awkward conversations. Then Ryan walked over carrying 2 glasses of sparkling water and smiled at me as if we had known each other forever. "It looks like everyone else already found someone to talk to," he said. "So I guess we're stuck with each other." I laughed, and somehow that one simple conversation lasted for hours. We talked about work, family, childhood memories, favorite movies, and dreams for the future. There was never an uncomfortable silence between us. Before the night ended, we exchanged numbers. A week later, we met for coffee. Coffee turned into dinner. Dinner became weekend trips. And before I knew it, we were sharing an apartment overlooking a small park, where children laughed every afternoon. Ryan had a way of making ordinary moments feel special. Every morning he made coffee before. I woke up because he knew I hated rushing through breakfast. If I had an important meeting, he always sent me a text wishing me luck. When I came home exhausted after long days at work, dinner was sometimes already waiting on the table. My parents adored him. My friends joked that I had somehow found one of the few genuinely good men left in the world. I believed them because I believed him. When my father spent weeks in the hospital after heart surgery, Ryan never complained about sitting beside me in waiting rooms for hours. He brought coffee for my mother, talked with my father about baseball, and somehow managed to make those difficult days feel a little less overwhelming. Watching him comfort my family made me even more certain that I had chosen the right person. We talked about getting married often. Sometimes we'd walk through the park near our apartment, watching families play together, and Ryan would squeeze my hand. "One day," he'd whisper, "we'll bring our own kids here." I'd smile every time because I could picture it so clearly. A little house, a family, a future built together. It all felt real. But life rarely announces the moment everything begins to fall apart. At first, the changes were so small that I barely noticed them. Ryan started coming home later than usual. He blamed work, saying a new client demanded constant attention. His phone rang more often, and meetings seemed to stretch later into the evening. Whenever I asked if everything was okay, he'd smile, kiss my forehead, and promise things would settle down soon. I wanted to believe him. Trust doesn't disappear overnight. It fades one excuse at a time. A few weeks later, my best friend Sophie invited me to lunch. We had known each other since college, and she could usually tell when something was bothering me before I admitted it to myself. She stirred her iced tea and looked at me carefully. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Have you noticed Ryan acting differently lately?" I shrugged. "He's just busy." She hesitated. "I hope that's all it is." I laughed it off, telling her she was worrying too much. Ryan was working harder than ever. Successful people had stressful jobs. That was normal. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Then came the vacation. Months earlier, we had planned a week in Colorado. We booked flights, rented a cabin, and spent evenings talking about hiking trails and mountain sunsets. 3 days before we were supposed to leave, Ryan walked into the apartment looking exhausted. "I have to cancel," he said quietly. I stared at him. "What do you mean?" "I can't leave work right now. You promised." "I know." His voice sounded full of regret. "I'm so sorry." I wanted to be angry, but instead I hugged him. I told him we'd go another time. He thanked me for understanding. Another time never came. After that, little disappointments became part of everyday life. Missed dinners, forgotten plans, phone calls he suddenly needed to take outside on the balcony. His phone was always locked, always turned face down whenever it rested on the table. One evening, while he was taking out the trash, his phone lit up. A single heart emoji appeared on the screen. No name, no message preview, just a heart. I froze. Before I could even think about it, the screen went black again. Ryan walked back inside, picked up his phone almost immediately, and slipped it into his pocket. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah." "You look tired." "I am." That part was true. I was tired of wondering why something felt different. I was tired of convincing myself that I was imagining things. Still, I never accused him. Love has a strange way of making us protect the people who hurt us, especially before we have proof. I kept telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe the heart emoji came from a family member. Maybe one of his coworkers joked that way. Maybe I was letting my imagination turn small moments into something they weren't. Every time doubt appeared, I found another excuse to push it away. I loved Ryan, and love has a dangerous habit of defending the very person who is quietly breaking your trust. A few weeks later, something happened that I couldn't explain away. My office closed unexpectedly because of a power outage. It was only a little after noon, and everyone was told to go home for the day. As I walked to my car, I smiled to myself. Ryan loved the sandwiches from a small deli near his office, and I thought it would be nice to surprise him. We hadn't had lunch together in weeks. I picked up our favorite order and drove across town, imagining the look on his face when he saw me. For a moment, everything felt normal again. I remembered the early days of our relationship when surprises like this happened all the time. When I walked into the lobby of his office building, the receptionist smiled politely. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to surprise Ryan." She looked at her computer, then back at me with a confused expression. "I'm sorry, but Ryan isn't here today." I frowned. "He told me he had meetings all day." She checked the screen again. "He requested personal leave this morning." For a second, I thought she must have made a mistake. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I'm positive." I thanked her and slowly walked back outside, still holding the bag of sandwiches. Suddenly, they felt much heavier than they had a few minutes earlier. I called Ryan. No answer. I called again. Straight to voicemail. About an hour later, my phone rang. "Hey," he said. "Sorry, I was stuck in a meeting." I looked back at the office building standing across the street. A meeting? Yeah, it just finished. Something inside me went quiet. Not angry, not emotional, just quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't tell him where I was. I simply wished him a good afternoon and ended the call. For the first time in 4 years, I knew he had lied to me. That evening, I acted as if nothing had happened. We ate dinner together, watched television, and talked about our day. Ryan described meetings that had never happened. He spoke so naturally that I wondered how many times he had practiced telling stories that weren't true. As he talked, I noticed details I'd ignored before. He avoided looking directly at me whenever he mentioned work. He changed subjects quickly whenever I asked simple questions. Every answer sounded polished, almost rehearsed. Later that night, while he slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling. Trust doesn't disappear the moment someone lies. It disappears the moment you realize they can lie without feeling guilty. The next morning, I called Sophie. "I think something's wrong," I admitted. She didn't sound surprised. "What happened?" I told her everything. She listened quietly before speaking. "I don't want to make things worse, Emma. But I think you need to stop accepting his explanations without checking them." "You think he's cheating?" "I think he's hiding something." Those words stayed with me all day. Not cheating, hiding something. There was a difference. Cheating was painful enough. But secrets could be much bigger. Over the next week, I stopped asking questions. Instead, I started paying attention. Ryan left earlier than usual almost every morning. Sometimes he came home smelling like expensive cologne that wasn't his. Other nights he seemed unusually cheerful, almost relieved, as if something good had happened while he was away. One evening, he stepped into the shower after arriving home. His phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. I looked at it for several seconds. I had never gone through his phone before. Not once. It felt wrong. It felt like crossing a line. Then I remembered standing outside, his office holding 2 untouched sandwiches while he lied to me over the phone. Slowly, I picked it up. The screen was locked. I sighed and placed it back exactly where I'd found it. Even then, I wasn't ready to become someone who searched through another person's private life. A few days later, Ryan announced another business trip. "Just 2 nights, he said while packing a suitcase. "New York?" "Yeah." "When do you leave?" "Early tomorrow." I smiled. "Safe trip?" He kissed me goodbye the next morning. As soon as his car disappeared down the street, I opened my laptop. Ryan and I shared access to a travel rewards account we had used for vacations. over the years. Out of curiosity, I logged in. I expected to see a flight to New York. Instead, there wasn't one. No reservation, no airline ticket, nothing. My heart began pounding. Maybe his company booked it separately. That had to be it. I called the hotel where he said he'd be staying. The woman at the front desk searched the reservation list. "I'm sorry," she said politely. "We don't have anyone by that name checking in today." I thanked her and hung up. My hands were shaking. This wasn't one lie anymore. This was an entire story built on lies. I wanted to call him. I wanted to demand answers. Instead, I sat in complete silence. If I confronted him now, he'd simply invent another excuse. No, if I wanted the truth, I needed proof. For the first time in my life, I stopped thinking like a girlfriend. I started thinking like someone trying to solve a mystery. And deep inside, I had the unsettling feeling that whatever I was about to uncover would change far more than just our relationship. I spent the rest of the day trying to convince myself I was overreacting. But every new fact pointed in the same direction. Ryan wasn't simply keeping a few harmless secrets. He was living a life I knew nothing about. The hardest part wasn't the uncertainty anymore. It was realizing that every memory I cherished now came with a question I couldn't answer. Had he really been where he said he was? Had those late nights actually been work? Had our future ever been real to him? I decided that if I wanted the truth, I had to stay calm. Anger would only make him more careful. So when he called that evening, I answered with my usual smile in my voice. "How's New York?" I asked. He laughed. "Busy as always. I've barely had time to breathe." I looked out the window, feeling my chest tighten. "I hope you're getting enough rest. I will once this project is over." He sounded relaxed, almost happy. When the call ended, I sat there for several minutes, staring at my phone. It wasn't just one lie anymore. He was building entire conversations around things that never happened. The next morning, Sophie came over with coffee. She took one look at me and knew I hadn't slept. "You've made up your mind, haven't you?" she asked. I nodded. "I need proof." She hesitated before speaking. "Whatever you find, promise me something." "What?" "Promise you'll protect yourself first. Don't make decisions while you're angry." I smiled weakly. I don't even know if I'm angry anymore. The truth was, I felt empty. The man I loved was becoming a stranger one lie at a time. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a notification from our joint credit card account. We had opened it years earlier to collect travel rewards. Usually, I ignored the alerts. This one caught my attention. A charge had been made at a luxury restaurant. Not in New York. In Chicago. Only 20 minutes from our apartment. I stared at the screen, reading the location over and over. Ryan wasn't hundreds of miles away. He was here, close enough to drive home if he wanted to. I felt tears gathering in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Instead, I opened the restaurant's website. It was the kind of place couples visited for anniversaries and marriage proposals. Not business meetings, not quick lunches, special occasions. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. For the first time, I whispered the words out loud. "He's cheating." Hearing myself say it made everything feel painfully real. That evening, Ryan called again. "I'm exhausted," he said. "This trip has been non-stop." "I can imagine." "You sound tired." "I've had a long day, too. We'll make up for lost time when I get home." I almost laughed. The confidence in his voice was unbelievable. He had no idea that every lie was leading me closer to the truth. After we hung up, I opened social media. Ryan rarely posted anything himself, but he had dozens of friends and coworkers who did. I searched through tagged photos, recent check-ins, and public posts. For nearly an hour, I found nothing. Then I noticed a picture uploaded by someone I didn't recognize. It showed a crowded rooftop restaurant. People were laughing, holding drinks, enjoying the evening skyline. At first, I almost scrolled past it. Then I froze. In the background, slightly out of focus, sat Ryan. Across from him was a woman I had never seen before. She was smiling at him. He was smiling back. His hand rested gently over hers on the table. It wasn't a business dinner. It wasn't a work meeting. It was a date. I zoomed in until the image became blurry. Even then, there was no doubt. It was him. I expected myself to cry. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Maybe because the uncertainty was finally over. The questions that had kept me awake for weeks finally had answers. The man I trusted most had betrayed me. But something else caught my attention. The woman tagged in the photo wasn't using her real name. Her profile contained very little information. But one detail stood out. She worked for a nonprofit organization, not the company Ryan claimed to be meeting. Curious, I opened her profile. Most of it was private. Still, a few public photos remained. One showed her standing outside a modern office building. Another featured her accepting an award at a charity event. Then I saw someone standing beside her. Ryan. Only this picture wasn't recent. It had been posted almost 2 years earlier. 2 years. My stomach dropped. This hadn't started a few weeks ago. It had been going on for years. I kept scrolling until I found an old group photo from a fundraising gala. I recognized the ballroom immediately. It was the same charity event where Ryan and I had first met. Only this time, I noticed something I had completely missed back then. The woman was there too, standing only a few feet away from us. Ryan had introduced himself to me that night, while already knowing her. I closed the app and covered my mouth. Everything suddenly looked different. Had meeting me even been an accident, or had I simply walked into a story that had begun long before I arrived? As those thoughts raced through my mind, one message notification appeared on my screen. It wasn't from Ryan. It was from someone whose name I had never seen before. The message contained only one sentence. If you want to know who Ryan really is, stop looking at his lies and start looking at his past. The message stayed on my screen for several minutes before I found the courage to open the sender's profile. There was almost nothing there. No profile picture, no recent posts, no personal information. It looked like an account created only to send that single message. I typed a reply. Who are you? For several minutes, nothing happened. Then 3 little dots appeared. Someone who made the same mistake you did. A chill ran through my body. I swallowed hard before typing again. What do you mean? The response came almost immediately. Ryan isn't the man you think he is. He never was. I stared at the words, reading them over and over. Can you prove it? There was another long pause. Finally, a new message appeared. Yes, but not here. Attached was the address of a quiet coffee shop on the other side of the city. Tomorrow, 10 in the morning. Come alone. I almost deleted the conversation. Every warning I'd ever heard about meeting strangers echoed through my mind. But another voice kept asking the same question. What if this person knew the truth? The next morning, I told Sophie everything. She immediately frowned. I don't like this. Neither do I. Then don't go. What if this is my only chance to understand what's really happening? She sighed. If you go, text me the address. I'll stay nearby. I agreed. Just knowing someone would be close made me feel a little safer. At exactly 10 o'clock, I walked into the coffee shop. It was almost empty. A woman sitting near the window looked up as I entered. She raised one hand slightly. Emma? I nodded. She looked to be in her mid-30s, calm, tired, like someone who hadn't slept well in a long time. My name is Claire, she said quietly. We ordered coffee and sat in silence for nearly a minute. Finally, she reached into her bag and placed a small envelope on the table. You should look at these. Inside were photographs. Some showed Ryan at different restaurants. Others showed him attending events. Each picture included a different woman, different dates, different years. I felt my stomach twist. This can't be... Claire nodded slowly. It is. She looked out the window before continuing. I dated Ryan 3 years before you met him. I couldn't speak. He told me I was the love of his life. The words sounded painfully familiar. He talked about marriage, children, a future together. Exactly the same promises. When I started asking questions about strange phone calls and missing weekends, he told me I was being insecure. I lowered my eyes. He said the same thing to me. Claire gave a sad smile. I figured. She took a deep breath. When I finally discovered another woman, I confronted him. What happened? He cried. I almost laughed at how predictable it sounded. He apologized. Promised he'd change. I believed him. And a month later, I found out there were actually 2 other women. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Claire folded her hands together. Ryan doesn't just cheat. He builds separate lives. Those words echoed in my mind. Separate lives. He studies people, she continued. He learns exactly what they need emotionally. If someone values loyalty, he becomes dependable. If someone wants adventure, he becomes exciting. If someone dreams about family, he talks about children. I realized every memory I treasured had probably been carefully chosen to make me trust him faster. He mirrors people, Claire said softly. You don't fall in love with him. You fall in love with the version of yourself he reflects back. I felt tears filling my eyes. Not because of the betrayal anymore, because I finally understood why leaving him felt impossible. The person I loved had never existed. Claire reached into her bag one last time. "This belongs to you now." She handed me a folder. Inside were printed emails, screenshots, and copies of public business records. "What is all this?" I spent years collecting information. I looked through the pages. At first, they seemed unrelated. Company names, property records, financial documents. Then one document caught my attention. Ryan's signature appeared under a different last name. I frowned. Why is his last name different? Claire looked directly into my eyes. Because Ryan isn't even using his real name. My heartbeat quickened. What? The name you know isn't the one he was born with. I stared at her, unable to process what she had just said. She continued quietly. He legally changed it several years ago. Why? No one knows for sure. She pointed toward another document. Start there. I opened it. It was an old newspaper article. The headline mentioned a financial investigation involving a consulting company. Several names appeared beneath the article. One of them was Ryan's original name. I looked up at Claire. He told me he'd never even been involved in a business investigation. I know. He told all of us different stories. I suddenly understood why he rarely talked about his past, why none of his childhood friends ever visited, why every conversation about his early 20s ended quickly. His past wasn't just private, it was carefully hidden. Claire stood up. I've carried this for years. Why are you giving it to me? Because you're the first person who still has a chance to stop him, before someone else gets hurt. She walked toward the door before turning back. One more thing. What? Don't confront him yet. Why? Because if Ryan realizes you know the truth, he'll disappear, and he'll become someone else's perfect man. She left before I could ask another question. I sat there alone, staring at the folder in front of me. I had spent weeks believing I was uncovering an affair. Instead, I had uncovered an entirely different identity, and somehow, I had the feeling that the biggest secret was still waiting to be discovered. I drove home with the folder sitting on the passenger seat, but I couldn't bring myself to open it again. Every answer inside seemed to create 3 new questions. The man I had loved for 4 years wasn't just unfaithful. He had built his entire life on carefully chosen stories, and I had accepted every one of them without hesitation. I kept replaying our memories in my mind, searching for the moment I should have realized something was wrong. The truth was painful. There wasn't one single moment. There had been dozens, but I had explained everyone away because I wanted our relationship to be real. When I reached the apartment, the place felt different. The furniture hadn't moved. The pictures on the walls were exactly where they had always been. Ryan's jacket still hung beside the front door. Yet everything looked unfamiliar, as if I were standing inside a stranger's home instead of my own. I made a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the folder once more. There were copies of business records, old newspaper articles, and screenshots of conversations between people I had never met. At first, none of it seemed connected. Then I noticed the dates. The names changed. The cities changed. Even the jobs changed. But one thing stayed exactly the same. Ryan, or whatever his real name was. Every few years, he seemed to disappear and begin again somewhere else. New city, new career, new group of friends, new relationship. It wasn't random. It was a pattern. I leaned back in my chair and whispered to myself, "Who are you?" A few minutes later, my phone rang. Ryan. I took a deep breath before answering. "Hey," I said. "Hi, beautiful." His voice sounded cheerful. "I'll be home tomorrow afternoon. I can't wait to see you." Neither of us believed those words anymore. At least I didn't. We talked for another 10 minutes. He described meetings that never happened, restaurants he had never visited, and clients who probably didn't exist. For the first time, I wasn't listening as his girlfriend. I was listening like someone comparing a story to the evidence. Every sentence contained another small contradiction. When the call ended, I wrote everything down in a notebook. Times, places, names. I didn't know exactly why. I just had a feeling I'd need it later. I spread every document across the living room floor until there was barely any carpet left to see. Newspaper clippings sat beside business records. Receipts rested next to printed emails. Photographs from different years formed a timeline I had never intended to create. At first it looked like chaos, but the longer I stared at everything, the more I noticed a pattern. Ryan never stayed in one place for very long. Every few years he changed jobs. He changed cities. He changed friends. Sometimes he even changed the way he dressed. It was as if he kept reinventing himself before anyone had the chance to ask too many questions. I grabbed my notebook and began writing down every company name I could find. Most of them no longer existed. Some had merged with larger firms. Others had quietly disappeared. Then one name appeared again. Not often, just enough to stand out. A consulting company Ryan had mentioned exactly once during our relationship. At the time, he had described it as an old client. According to the documents in front of me, it had actually been his employer. Why lie about something so ordinary? That question stayed with me all afternoon. The following day, I asked my manager if I could work remotely. She agreed without hesitation, unaware that I wasn't planning to spend the day working at all. Instead, I visited the city's public records office. Hours passed as I searched through archived business registrations and public filings. Most of what I found confirmed things Claire had already discovered. Then an older employee approached my desk. "You've been looking at those records for quite a while." "I'm researching someone." He smiled politely. "Sometimes old newspaper archives help more than business records." He pointed me toward another room. I thanked him and walked over. The archive contained thousands of scanned newspapers dating back decades. I searched Ryan's original name. Nothing. Then I searched the consulting company's name. Several articles appeared. Most were ordinary business news. One headline caught my attention. "Consulting firm faces lawsuit after investors report missing funds." I opened the article. The company had promised financial advice to small business owners. When the company suddenly closed, dozens of clients claimed they had been left without answers. No criminal charges had been filed. No dramatic ending, just confusion. Several executives resigned before the investigation concluded. One of those executives had Ryan's original last name. I leaned closer to the screen. His photograph was small, grainy, and several years old. But there was no doubt. It was him, except he looked younger, less confident, almost nervous. I printed the article and placed it in my folder. Something still didn't fit. If the investigation had ended years ago, why was he still hiding from it? There had to be another reason. That evening, Ryan cooked dinner. He laughed while telling me a story about one of his coworkers. Normally, I would have laughed too. Instead, I found myself wondering if the coworker even existed. "You're quiet tonight," he said. "Just tired. You've been working too hard." The irony almost made me smile. After dinner, he suggested watching a movie. Halfway through, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. "I need to take this." He stepped onto the balcony and closed the door behind him. For the first time, I didn't try to hear what he was saying. Instead, I watched his reflection in the glass. His expression changed completely. The warm smile disappeared. He looked serious, almost worried. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. When he returned, he slipped his phone into his pocket. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just work." I nodded. Another lie. Later that night, after he had fallen asleep, I remembered something Claire had said. "He studies people." Maybe that explained how he manipulated emotions so easily, but it didn't explain why someone had warned me that I was still looking at the wrong secret. The next morning, I received another message from the unknown number. "Meet me at the lake, noon." No name, no explanation, just a location. I almost ignored it. Then another message appeared. "Bring the newspaper article." My heart skipped. Whoever this person was, they knew exactly what I had found. At noon, I parked near the lakeside and waited. 10 minutes passed. Then an older man approached the bench where I was sitting. He wore a baseball cap and carried a worn leather folder. "You must be Emma." I stood cautiously. "And you are?" "My name is Daniel." He sat down slowly. "I worked with Ryan many years ago." I didn't interrupt. He wasn't always like this. That surprised me. "What do you mean?" Daniel sighed. "When I first met him, he was ambitious, smart, friendly. So what changed?" He discovered that pretending to be whoever people wanted was easier than being himself. Daniel opened his folder. Inside were old employee photographs, training certificates, meeting schedules. He wasn't the mastermind people imagined. He simply learned how easily trust could be earned, and how rarely people questioned someone who sounded confident. I looked at him carefully. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because someone else is going to get hurt if nobody stops him." He handed me one final document. It wasn't a financial record. It wasn't a business contract. It was a marriage certificate. My hands froze. The groom's photograph was unmistakable. Ryan. But the bride wasn't me, nor was she the woman from the rooftop restaurant. The certificate had been issued years before I had even met him. I looked up in disbelief. He was married? Daniel nodded slowly. And as far as public records show? He paused, letting the words settle. That marriage was never legally dissolved. My mind raced. If that document was genuine, then every promise Ryan had made to me about marriage and our future had been impossible from the very beginning. The man I thought I knew hadn't just hidden a relationship. He had hidden an entire life. I stared at the marriage certificate for what felt like forever. My hands were trembling, so badly that I had to place it on the bench before I accidentally dropped it. Ryan had talked about our future for years. He had shown me engagement rings in store windows. He had asked me what kind of wedding I dreamed of. He had even joked about what our children might look like one day. And all along, he already had a wife. I looked back at Daniel. Are you absolutely sure this is real? He nodded without hesitation. I only bring proof, Emma, never rumors. But why hasn't anyone exposed him? Daniel sighed. Because he never stays in one place long enough. He leaves before people connect the pieces. I looked down at the document again. The wedding had taken place almost 9 years earlier. A small ceremony in another state. The bride's name was Laura. I had never heard Ryan mention her. Not once. Daniel stood up. I've told you everything I know. Wait. He stopped. Does Laura know about me? He looked away for a moment. I honestly don't know. Then he walked away, disappearing into the afternoon crowd. I remained on the bench long after he was gone. For weeks I had believed I was uncovering an affair. Now I was questioning whether my entire relationship had been built on something legally and emotionally impossible. When I arrived home, Ryan was already there. He smiled as I walked through the door. You're home early. So are you. My afternoon meetings were canceled. I forced a smile. That's nice. He walked over and kissed my forehead. The same gentle gesture that had once made me feel safe now felt strangely unfamiliar. As he disappeared into the bedroom to change clothes, I quietly locked myself in the bathroom. I looked at my reflection. The woman staring back looked exhausted. Not because of heartbreak anymore, because the truth had become heavier than I ever imagined. That evening, Ryan suggested ordering takeout. While we waited for dinner, he sat beside me on the couch. You've seemed distant lately. I've just had a lot on my mind. You know you can tell me anything. Those words almost broke me. The irony was unbearable. I wanted to ask him about Laura, about the false name, about the lies. Instead, I simply nodded. I know. He squeezed my hand. I love you. There was a time when hearing those words made every difficult day easier. Now they sounded rehearsed, like lines from a script he had memorized years ago. After dinner, Ryan fell asleep on the couch while the television played quietly in the background. His phone rested on the coffee table. For several minutes, I stared at it. Then it vibrated. A message appeared on the lock screen. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. No name, just another heart. This time I didn't look away. I took a picture of the notification with my own phone before the screen went dark. It wasn't much, but it was proof. The next morning, while Ryan was in the shower, another notification appeared. This one showed part of the message before disappearing. Laura is asking questions. My heart nearly stopped. Laura, the wife from the marriage certificate. I quickly wrote the name in my notebook. Ryan came out of the bathroom seconds later, humming as if nothing in the world was wrong. I smiled. He smiled back. Neither of us mentioned the phone. Later that afternoon, I met Sophie again. She listened silently as I explained everything Daniel had told me. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. This is bigger than cheating. I know. This man has been lying to everyone. I know. She reached across the table and gently took my hand. What are you going to do? I looked out the cafe window. For weeks, I've been reacting. She waited. I'm done reacting. What does that mean? It means I'm going to stop chasing answers. I'm going to let the truth come to me. Sophie frowned. How? I smiled for the first time in days. Ryan believes I don't know anything. That's his biggest mistake. For the next several days, I became the perfect girlfriend again. I laughed at his jokes. I asked about work. I kissed him goodbye every morning. I stopped questioning his stories completely. The change was immediate. Ryan relaxed. He left his phone unattended more often. He talked more freely. His confidence returned. exactly as I hoped it would. People become careless when they believe they've won. One Friday evening, Ryan walked into the apartment looking unusually excited. "I have great news." "What happened?" "I've been invited to an exclusive charity gala next weekend." I recognized the name of the event immediately. It was one of the largest fundraising galas in the city. Business leaders, investors, local media, hundreds of guests. "You should come with me," he said. I smiled warmly. "I'd love to." As soon as he left the room, I opened my laptop. The event's website listed all confirmed sponsors and organizing committee members. One name made my heart race. Laura, the same last name that appeared on the marriage certificate. According to the website, she was one of the event's major donors. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Ryan had invited me to an event, where his legal wife would also be present. Either he believed they'd never cross paths, or he had another lie prepared for everyone involved. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't confused. I wasn't heartbroken. I had something far more powerful, the truth. And I had a feeling that the charity gala would become the place where every one of Ryan's carefully constructed lies would finally collide. The week leading up to the gala felt strangely peaceful. Ryan was happier than I had seen him in months. He whistled while making breakfast, joked about what kind of dress I should wear, and even suggested we make a weekend out of the event. Watching him smile so effortlessly was unsettling. He truly believed everything was under control. He had no idea that every kind word, every compliment, and every promise only reminded me how easily he could switch between truth and fiction. A few days before the gala, he came home carrying a small shopping bag. "I have something for you," he said with a grin. Inside was a beautiful navy blue evening dress. I looked at it for a long moment. "It's gorgeous. I knew it would look perfect on you." I thanked him and hugged him, even though my heart felt heavier than ever. Years ago, a gift like that would have made me cry with happiness. Now it felt like another carefully chosen piece of a performance. That night, after Ryan had gone to bed, I called Sophie. "So it's really happening?" she asked. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "Next Saturday. Are you ready?" "I don't know if anyone could ever be ready for something like this." She was quiet for a moment. "Promise me one thing." "What?" "No matter what happens, stay calm." "I will. Don't let him control the story." "I won't." After ending the call, I looked at the folder one last time. Every document, every photo, every note I'd collected over the past several weeks was now organized in chronological order. I wasn't planning a scene. I wasn't looking for revenge through anger or humiliation. I wanted the truth to speak for itself. Saturday finally arrived. The ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Soft music filled the room. And hundreds of guests moved from table to table, greeting old friends and business partners. Ryan looked completely at ease. He smiled, shook hands, and introduced me to people as if we were the happiest couple in the room. "This is Emma," he said proudly. "She's the best thing that's ever happened to me." Several people smiled warmly. I smiled back. If only they knew. As we walked farther into the ballroom, I quietly scanned the room. Then I saw her. Laura. She looked elegant and confident, speaking with several guests near the stage. She laughed at something someone said, completely unaware that the man she was legally married to was standing less than 30 feet away with another woman on his arm. Ryan hadn't noticed her yet. At least I didn't think he had. A few minutes later, the event host welcomed everyone and invited guests to enjoy dinner before the evening's fundraising presentation. Ryan excused himself. "I need to say hello to someone. I'll be right back." As soon as he disappeared into the crowd, I took a deep breath and walked toward Laura. She smiled politely as I approached. "Good evening." "Good evening," I replied. "I'm Emma. It's nice to meet you." "You too." For a few moments, we talked about the charity event, the weather, and the city's growing skyline. She seemed kind, intelligent, and completely genuine. Then she asked a question that caught me off guard. "So, how do you know Ryan?" My heart skipped. She knew his name. I answered carefully. "We've been together for almost 4 years." The smile on her face slowly disappeared. "I'm sorry. I thought you said together?" "Yes." She stared at me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Finally, she whispered, "There must be some misunderstanding." I reached into my purse and quietly removed a photograph of Ryan and me from our vacation 2 years earlier. I handed it to her. She looked at the picture, then back at me, then at the picture again. The color drained from her face. He told me, her voice cracked. He told me we were separated. I felt my stomach drop. You know Ryan? She nodded slowly. My husband. The word hit me harder than I expected, even though I had already seen the marriage certificate. Hearing it spoken aloud made everything real. Laura looked as shocked as I felt. When did you meet him? She asked quietly. 4 years ago. She closed her eyes. We've been married for 9. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us blamed the other. In that moment, it became painfully clear that we had both believed the same man. Before either of us could say another word, Ryan appeared several feet away. He saw us standing together. His smile disappeared instantly. For the first time since I'd known him, genuine panic crossed his face. He hurried toward us. Emma? Laura? This isn't what it looks like. Laura looked at him with tears in her eyes. Then tell us what it is. Ryan opened his mouth. No words came out. He looked at me, then at Laura, then back at me again. For years, he'd always had the perfect explanation, the perfect excuse, the perfect lie. This time, there wasn't one. The silence around us seemed louder than the music filling the ballroom. A few nearby guests noticed the tension and glanced in our direction. Ryan lowered his voice. Please, let's talk somewhere private. I calmly shook my head. No. Laura looked at me, then back at Ryan. I think we've spent enough years having private conversations. Ryan's shoulders slowly dropped. He realized something in that moment. The carefully separated worlds he had spent years maintaining had finally collided, and there was no way to pull them apart again. Ryan looked from Laura to me, then back again. His confidence had vanished so completely that, for a moment, I almost didn't recognize him. This was the same man who always had the perfect answer, the perfect smile and the perfect excuse. Now, he looked like someone searching for an exit that didn't exist. Please, he said quietly. Both of you. Let's go somewhere private. I can explain. Laura folded her arms. You've had 9 years to explain. I looked at him without saying a word. For the first time since we'd met, silence was doing all the talking. A few guests nearby had begun to notice us. They weren't staring openly yet, but curious glances were becoming harder to ignore. Ryan forced a nervous smile. Emma, you know me. You know I'd never intentionally hurt you. I almost laughed. I thought I knew you. His eyes filled with panic. Nothing is what you think. Laura shook her head slowly. Then tell us the truth. Ryan opened his mouth, but no words came. Instead, he looked around the ballroom as if hoping someone would interrupt the conversation. No one did. I reached into my purse and took out a folded envelope. Inside were copies of the photographs, business records, and newspaper articles I had collected. I didn't throw them at him. I didn't raise my voice. I simply placed the envelope on a nearby table. I stopped asking questions weeks ago, I said calmly. I started collecting answers. Ryan's face turned pale. He recognized the newspaper article immediately. Where did you get these? Does it matter? His breathing became heavier. You went through my past. I nodded. No. Your past finally caught up with you. Laura slowly opened the envelope. She looked through each page in complete silence. Photographs. Different names. Different cities. Different women. Copies of public records. Old articles. Every page answered a question while creating another. When she reached the marriage certificate, her hands began to shake. She looked directly at Ryan. You told me all of this had been left behind. He didn't answer. You promised there was nothing else. Still nothing. A few more guests had gathered nearby, sensing that something serious was unfolding. One older gentleman approached carefully. Is everything all right? Ryan quickly forced another smile. Everything's fine. Before anyone else could speak, Laura quietly held up the marriage certificate. No, it isn't. The gentleman looked confused before politely stepping back. No one wanted to interfere, but no one was leaving either. Ryan looked at me desperately. What do you want? It was the first honest question he'd asked in a long time. I thought about it carefully. Weeks earlier, I would have answered differently. I would have wanted revenge. An apology. Justice. Now, I want the truth. He lowered his head. I made mistakes. Laura let out a bitter laugh. Mistakes? She pointed toward the documents. These aren't mistakes. They're choices. Ryan closed his eyes. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. I finally spoke again. Yet everyone did. The words hung in the air. He couldn't argue with them, because they were true. After several long moments, Ryan quietly pulled out a chair and sat down. His shoulders slumped. I've been running for years. No one interrupted. I kept thinking I could start over, become someone better. But every time people got too close, I left. Laura wiped away a tear. So instead of fixing your life, you kept creating new ones. He nodded almost imperceptibly. I thought I could separate everything. My past, my relationships, my mistakes. I convinced myself that if those worlds never met, they weren't real. I looked around the ballroom. Several guests had quietly returned to their conversations, giving us space. No one applauded. No one cheered. Real life didn't work that way. It was simply three people standing face to face with years of hidden truth. Ryan looked at me again. I'm sorry. I believed he meant it. But some apologies arrived too late. I spent 4 years loving someone who never really existed, I said softly. I don't hate you. His eyes filled with tears. But I don't know who you are. Laura stood up. I've heard enough. She placed her wedding ring on the table. I'm done believing promises. She walked away without looking back. Ryan watched her disappear into the crowd. Then he looked at me. Are you leaving too? I took one final look at the man I had once imagined marrying. The man who had promised me forever. The man who had built an entire relationship on carefully arranged pieces of the truth. Yes, he didn't try to stop me. Maybe because he finally understood that some things can't be repaired with another explanation. As I walked toward the ballroom doors, I felt surprisingly calm. Not because I had won, not because Ryan had lost, but because I no longer carried the weight of uncertainty. The truth had finally replaced the lies, and for the first time in weeks, I felt free. I stepped out of the ballroom into the cool night air and took the deepest breath I had taken in weeks. The city lights stretched across the skyline, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the silence around me wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was Ryan. I watched it ring until it stopped. Then another call came, and another. By the time I reached my car, there were 6 missed calls and 3 text messages. Please let me explain. I'm begging you. Just give me 5 minutes. I locked my phone without reading anything else. There was nothing left to explain. The truth had already said everything. When I got home, the apartment felt strangely empty, even though Ryan's belongings were still there. I walked from room to room, looking at the life we had built together. Every picture on the wall carried a memory that now felt different. I took one frame off the shelf. It was from our trip to Lake Michigan during our 2nd year together. We were smiling at the camera, looking happier than ever. I stared at it for a long moment before placing it carefully inside a box. I wasn't trying to erase the past. I was simply making room for the future. The next morning, Ryan came home. He looked exhausted. His tie was gone. His shirt was wrinkled. He stood quietly near the front door. Can we talk? I nodded. For a few minutes. He sat across from me at the kitchen table. Neither of us spoke at first. Finally, he broke the silence. I never planned for any of this to happen. I looked at him calmly. But it did. He nodded. I kept telling myself I'd fix everything. When? I don't know. Before or after you proposed to me? He lowered his eyes. I don't have an answer. No, you don't. He rubbed his hands together nervously. I know I've lost your trust. I took a slow breath. You lost it long before I discovered the truth. He looked around the apartment. I'll move out. I simply nodded. There was nothing else to say. For the next several hours, Ryan quietly packed his clothes and personal belongings. The apartment echoed with the sound of drawers opening and closing. At one point, he stopped in front of the bookshelf where we kept framed photographs. He picked up one picture, looked at it for several seconds, then carefully placed it back. As he carried the last box toward the door, he turned around. I really did love you. I believe that he believed those words, but love without honesty cannot survive. I hope one day, I said quietly, you stop running from your own life. He nodded. I'm going to try. Then he walked out the door. It closed softly behind him. And just like that, 4 years ended with a single click of a lock. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Healing never happens overnight. Some mornings I woke up expecting to hear Ryan making coffee in the kitchen. Sometimes I reached for my phone to tell him something funny before remembering. There was no longer a reason to call. Grief doesn't disappear just because someone betrayed you. You still mourn the future you imagined. Sophie stayed by my side through all of it. She reminded me to eat when I forgot. She convinced me to start running again. She even persuaded me to take the Colorado vacation I'd postponed years earlier. This time I went alone. Standing on a mountain trail at sunrise, I realized something important. For years, I had believed happiness depended on sharing life with someone else. Now I understood that peace begins when you're honest with yourself. One afternoon, several months later, I received an unexpected email from Laura. She thanked me for telling her the truth. She explained that she had started rebuilding her own life and finally felt hopeful again. We met for coffee a few weeks later. There was no anger between us, only understanding. Neither of us had betrayed the other. We had simply trusted the same person. Before leaving, Laura smiled. You know, what? I spent years wondering what I did wrong. So did I. She shook her head. We didn't do anything wrong. We believed someone who didn't know how to be honest. Those words stayed with me long after we left the cafe. Nearly a year passed. Life slowly found a new rhythm. I focused on my career. I spent more time with family. I laughed more often. One evening, while cleaning old files from my laptop, I found a folder filled with pictures of Ryan and me. For a moment, I considered deleting them all. Instead, I closed the folder. Some memories don't need to be erased. They simply need to stay where they belong. In the past, people often ask whether I regret those 4 years. The answer surprises them. No, I regret the lies. I regret ignoring my instincts. I regret believing excuses when the truth was quietly standing in front of me. But I don't regret becoming stronger because of what happened. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't exposing someone's secrets. It's refusing to let their choices define the rest of your life. Ryan spent years creating different versions of himself for different people. I spent one difficult year rediscovering the real version of me. And in the end, that made all the difference. If there's one lesson my story taught me, it's this. Trust is precious, but it should never require you to ignore your own instincts. Love should bring peace, not constant confusion. The right person will never ask you to question your worth or your reality. And no matter how carefully someone hides the truth, honesty has a way of finding the light. I lost the future I thought I wanted, but I found something far more valuable: myself.